All right, we're going to get started with the presentation now. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. Wonderful. Please save the applause for the end. My name is Matthew, and I'm a park ranger with Allegheny County down in the Pittsburgh area. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who's from Pittsburgh or lives in Pittsburgh now? Wonderful. So if after this presentation I haven't scared you off, Ranger Thomas over there and I have business cards and information about some of the stuff that we do as county park rangers. If you're interested in that, please see us after the presentation. The reason that we're here is that as park rangers, we do a lot of educational programming, including firefly programs. Ours is not specifically about synchronous fireflies, but this time of year there are fireflies all over Pennsylvania, and we like to teach people about them. And part of our programming that we do has a very small section where we would mention that there's a population of synchronous fireflies in the Allegheny National Forest. And then we would never really elaborate on that, so we decided we should probably check them out for ourselves, learn a little bit more about that, and see what these fireflies are all about. So a few years ago, Thomas and I decided to camp here in this very campground, and we saw the fireflies, and we met Ken and Peggy, and they were so welcoming, so we decided to come back the next year as volunteers, and from there we entered a partnership, and now we're able to come as rangers, do some tabling, lead some hikes, and my favorite part, which is this firefly presentation. So I'm very grateful to be here in front of all of you talking about fireflies, which are one of my favorite insects. The presentation tonight is The Secret Lives of Fireflies. My goal is to be able to tell you all of the answers to the questions you may have had or may not have even known you had about fireflies. If there are any questions you have at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to answer those for you. Or if you think of any questions while we're on the hike, you can ask any of the guides. But hopefully this will make it so that most of those questions get answered. Let's begin with Firefly 101 and our state insect. If I were to ask all of you to hold an insect in your hand, I imagine a firefly would be towards the top of the list compared to things like bees and wasps and anything that can bite or sting you. Fireflies are among the most beloved insects because they don't do anything that hurts people. They're not pest insects on farms or in gardens, and they have a beautiful light display. I know growing up in the eastern part of the state, each summer I would go out in my backyard with my family and we would try to capture fireflies. And that's a memory I hold near and dear to my heart. And it's a memory I'm sure that a lot of you who live in Pennsylvania have had. Some people have never experienced fireflies before, especially if you live west of the Mississippi River. Most of the fireflies out there don't light up. But for me, it's a very nostalgic aspect of my life, and fireflies are a very beloved insect in Pennsylvania, one of the reasons that they are our state insect. Do we have any other names that we have for fireflies? Lightning bugs, absolutely. That's what I grew up calling them. However, the names might suggest that they are flies or bugs. Not true. This is a fly. They are not flies. This is a bug. Bug is often a term that is used to describe any sort of creepy crawly, but in scientific terms, bugs are a specific order of insects that are defined by having piercing, sucking mouthparts. Fireflies don't have those mouthparts, hence they're not in the order Hemiptera, which is the true bugs. So it is not a bug. Instead, fireflies are in an order with some insects that you will very much recognize, including ladybugs and stag beetles. Fireflies are beetles, and we're going to discuss the parts of a beetle and the parts of an insect as a refresher in just a little bit. But Pennsylvania is a great habitat for fireflies. Fireflies have certain conditions that they need in order to survive and thrive, including a lot of humidity and a lot of darkness and a lot of warmth. And all of those conditions can be met here in Pennsylvania, which is why, for those of you who are native to the state, you'll see fireflies every single summer. And for a group of students in third grade back in 1974 in school near Philadelphia, they were learning about the state insect of Maryland and realized that Pennsylvania didn't have a state insect. So they petitioned their local government and were able to make the Pennsylvania firefly our state insect. The Pennsylvania firefly was actually already called the Pennsylvania firefly by scientists before it became our state insect, so it was just another reason that it made perfect sense to have the Pennsylvania firefly be Pennsylvania's state insect. If you've ever gone out into your backyards or seen baseball fields or been to your parks in the summer, you're going to see fireflies all over the place. Let's discuss what makes a firefly, starting with the parts of an insect. So without peeking, how many legs does an insect have? Six, absolutely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So spiders, insects?
No.
No. Scorpions?
No.
No. Beetles?
Yeah.
I thought I'd get some of you with that. Yeah, absolutely. Arachnids, like spiders and scorpions, have 8 legs. There's some sea creatures like crabs and shrimp that are also arthropods or in a similar group to insects, but insects are defined by having 6 legs. The number of body parts is also a defining feature of insects. How many body parts do insects have?
3.
3, absolutely. They are the head, thorax, and abdomen. And we're going to go from top to bottom and discuss some of the features of an insect's 3 body parts, specifically with a firefly. Starting off at the top of the head, what are these parts here? Yes, absolutely. They are the antenna. And the antenna are sensory organs on an insect that help them to perceive the world around them. They are constantly picking up chemical signals and processing those chemical signals. And in the case of fireflies, pheromones are going to be one of the most important things that they are processing with their antenna. The eyes of an insect are also really important for processing the world around them. If you take a look at the eye of this firefly, you'll notice what look like a lot of tiny little cells. These individual lenses make up the compound eye of an insect. And the compound eye takes those tiny little cells and takes small little snapshot images and compiles them together to have a better view of the world around it. For some species of insects like dragonflies, they can have up to 30,000 of these cells called ommatidia for every single eye. So that's a lot of tiny snapshot pictures of the world around them. However, it's not necessarily the most detailed. They do have a wide field of range of view, but it kind of looks a little bit like this side of the butterfly as opposed to what we view on the other side. Nonetheless, it's still really important for them to be able to see the world around them. If you've ever been in your house trying to swat a fly, and it feels like it's always one step ahead of you no matter how fast you are, that's because they have such a wide field of vision. They can see you coming even if you're standing behind them. Next up, we'll talk about the middle section of a firefly, which is the thorax. This is where all of the body parts are connecting together. It's the most important structural piece of the firefly. The head connects on the top of the thorax, the abdomen connects on the bottom of the thorax, and all of the wings and legs of the insect are connecting at the thorax. Sometimes with certain insect species, it might look like the really long legs are all the way at the bottom of the insect on the abdomen, but they are connecting to that middle section, the thorax. Now, in terms of insect wings, how many wings does an insect have?
4.
4, absolutely. I often get the answer of 2 when I ask that question, and if you think of butterflies and moths, it often looks like they just have 2 wings. In reality, they have 2 wings on the top and 2 wings on the bottom that are flapping, and it can sometimes look like only 2 wings in total, but they do have 4 wings. And this is one of the distinguishing features of beetles as opposed to other groups of insects, the difference in their wings. The bottom wings that you have here are membranous. These are the wings that they're going to be using to fly and generate lift. These are the kinds of wings that you see with flies and bees and wasps and butterflies. They all have membranous sets of wings. But the difference with beetles is this top set of wings here called the elytra. The elytra are a protective set of wings that act kind of like a shell. And when the insect, like a firefly, is ready to take flight, those elytra have to open up and the membranous wings underneath unfurl. And then they're able to take flight from there. So if you've ever seen a ladybug taking off before, off of a plant, you'll notice that the elytra with the spots on them kind of stick out to the side first. That's not because those wings are used for flapping, it's to expose and unfurl the larger membranous wings underneath so that they can generate lift and fly. The bottom part here of the firefly is the abdomen. And this is where all of the bodily systems of the firefly and of the insect are housed. Reproduction, digestion, the heart, all of that is stored down in the abdomen. And in the case of fireflies, they have a very special additional organ called the lantern, down at the bottom here. This is what lights up, and this is what is responsible for these beautiful scenes that we see all summer long. So I would like to discuss why and how these fireflies are able to produce a flash. The fireflies that you see here do not flash, and not all firefly species use light to communicate because they're awake at different times of the day and night. The fireflies you see here are diurnal, which is a fancy way of saying that they're only awake during the day. Diurnal and day both start with D, that's the way that I remember it. And if you're awake during the day and trying to communicate with light, It can be very, very difficult when you have a giant flaming orb above you, the sun. And the sun makes it extremely difficult for these fireflies to see each other. And if you can't see each other and see that light, you're not going to be able to communicate. So they have to rely on chemicals called pheromones that I mentioned earlier. And they're using their antenna to pick up those pheromone signals and communicate. There are a few different things that fireflies will be communicating about. Sometimes they might communicate if there are predators or threats nearby, but the main thing that they're communicating about with light or with pheromones is that they're looking for a potential mate. Here's a side-by-side comparison between our diurnal firefly and a nocturnal firefly. Nocturnal animals come out at night. Nocturnal and night both start with N, just like diurnal and day both start with D. It's easy to remember the times that they're out that way. And there's a couple of differences I want to point out between these fireflies. The antenna on this diurnal firefly are fairly large compared to the antenna on this nocturnal firefly. Because they need to rely on pheromone signals more than the nocturnal firefly, having larger antenna helps them to process those pheromone signals. You'll also notice on the nocturnal firefly, the lantern is very, very large because that's their mode of communication, compared to the reduced or non-existent lantern of those diurnal fireflies. You may have been walking around today and seen a bunch of firefly-looking insects slowly moving across your path, and in all likelihood, those were diurnal fireflies that are going about their day trying to find a mate using pheromones to communicate. There are over 2,000 species of fireflies worldwide. That includes both nocturnal and diurnal fireflies. In North America, we have over 125 species of fireflies, and in Pennsylvania alone, we have over 15 different species. I know when I grew up catching fireflies in the summer, not only did I not know that some fireflies were around during the day, I assumed that fireflies were all just one species or one group of animals. I had no idea the diversity and the timelines that are going on behind the scenes with these fireflies. I want to talk about the chemical reaction at play to produce light. And when organisms in nature produce light, this is called bioluminescence. Bio meaning life, luminescence meaning light. Bio, life, luminescence, light. And the chemical reaction starts with oxygen entering the body. And insects don't breathe in the same way that we do. They don't inhale and exhale using their lungs. They passively breathe. Oxygen is constantly flowing in through their body through tiny holes on the side of their body called spiracles. And when oxygen enters their body through those spiracles, it reacts with a bunch of different chemicals, including luciferin and luciferase. Luciferase is an enzyme or a protein, and when oxygen interacts with that, it catalyzes or starts this chemical reaction, and the result of that chemical reaction is light. This is a very energy efficient chemical reaction. If you were to touch a light bulb that was on for a while, it would be pretty hot. If you were to hold a firefly, it's not going to be hot because it's not losing a lot of energy in the form of heat. Some light bulbs can lose up to 90% of that energy that they're creating to heat, whereas these fireflies are retaining 90% of that energy and only losing about 10%. So it's a very energy efficient form of light that they're producing. Here is the staging ground for everything that you're going to be seeing at night. This is an ideal habitat for fireflies. There's lots of tall grass, lots of flowers, lots of places for them to hide during the day when they need to. If we compare that to the mowed field behind you over there, that is not going to be a very suitable habitat for fireflies. Any of the fireflies that are going to be ideally perched in the bushes or tall grass here are going to have nowhere to perch. And they're going to be susceptible to predators or even just people stepping on them or driving over them with their cars. So this is an ideal habitat for fireflies, and we're going to be entering into that habitat tonight to take a look for them. Come nighttime, this is what it looks like, and I want to go over what's happening behind the scenes. And Matt Miskey made mention of the subtitle of this program. Sometimes instead of the Secret Lives of Fireflies, we call this program Sex, Lies, and Fireflies. Because that's what's happening behind the scenes here for these fireflies. This is not necessarily this beautiful light display that you're all going to see tonight. At least that's what we view it as, this very peaceful, tranquil time where you can go out in your backyard and look for fireflies. For those fireflies that are making this display, this is a dire, urgent time of their lives. They spend very little time as adults relative to when they are larvae or children of fireflies, and they have very little time to reproduce and make sure that they're able to pass on their DNA and their genes to the next generation. Being a successful organism means passing on your genetic material and making sure that the offspring are able to pass it on to the next generation after that. So the 3 or 4 weeks that these fireflies are adults, this mating display is really, really urgent for them to make sure that they can pass on that genetic material. Again, looks really beautiful and peaceful for us, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that I want to uncover and unpack for you. Let's start off with how they're able to find a mate. The fireflies that you see flying above the grass and above the bushes, those are all the male fireflies. Any of the fireflies that you're actually going to see on the vegetation, those are the female fireflies. The male fireflies are flying around and they're flashing a specific pattern in the hopes of attracting a female firefly who's interested in mating. As the male is flying around, his hope is that she will flash the same pattern back. And if she doesn't flash that pattern back, in the darkness he has no idea where to land to find a mate. So he has to keep on flying around until someone's interested. If the female is interested, she'll flash back that pattern, he knows where to go land, and then they're able to mate. The females are able to be pretty picky though. There are anywhere from 30 to 50 males for every single female. So she does not have the same urgency to find a mate because she's got so many suitors and so many potential options for mates. So if there's a male firefly flying on by, flashing his pattern, and she thinks, not really interested in that one, it's not that urgent for her. She can wait until there's a better firefly nearby. And what it means to be a better firefly means that you're flashing your pattern really accurately and really brightly. Now, when I say flashing the pattern, I'm referring to the different flash patterns that different species have. But before we get to that, parental advisory warning. If you have children, you might want to cover their eyes here, because this is what's happening behind the scenes. That beautiful, nostalgic light display that you think of during the summer is this. Again, this is the urgency that these fireflies have to make sure that they pass on their genetic material. But back to those different flashes that I mentioned before. Fireflies from species to species will have different flash patterns. And that's to help locate other members of their species among all of the chaos of that beautiful light display. If all firefly species had the same flash pattern, they wouldn't be able to recognize other members of their species from members of different species. So by having a different flash pattern and a male accurately performing that flash pattern, females of the same species are able to differentiate and figure out which male seems like the best possible mate. So if a male is flashing a pattern, but maybe they're doing it a little bit off timing, or maybe it's not that bright, they're probably still the same species, but she's going to know if they can't even flash this pattern properly, they're probably not going to be a suitable mate. Maybe their genetic material is not all that great. And I got 29 to 49 other males that are going to be flying by that I can wait for. This is an example of a flash pattern chart. This is how scientists or people who are interested in fireflies are able to differentiate between these firefly species at night. If you're sitting out on your back porch taking a look at that light show, you can use a chart like this to figure out what species you have in your own backyard or your local park. This is dependent on temperature though. If it's too cold, the chemical reaction going on inside those fireflies is going to happen at a slower rate. And the speed or the rate of their flashing is going to be slower than if it's warm. If it's a really hot night, then that chemical reaction is going to be catalyzed and happen faster. And the rate here is going to be a lot more rapid than on a normal night. So scientists have different temperature ranges that are optimal and that they base these charts around. So if you do decide after this program that you're interested in fireflies and you want to go take a look at what fireflies you have in your area, make sure you know what the temperature is so that you don't mistake one firefly species for another. But the species that we're going to be talking about tonight is Photinus carolinus. This is a species of synchronous firefly. And the flash pattern, as Peggy mentioned before, is 6 rapid flashes over the course of a few seconds, followed by 8 to 10 seconds of no flashing. So that's what you want to keep an eye out for tonight when we're behind me over there taking a look for these fireflies.
And what's the little?
Oh yeah, let me go back for you.
Sorry.
You're looking at this here?
Yes.
Yes, so those are Big Dipper fireflies, Photinus paralis. This is one of the most common species that you'll see in Pennsylvania, and we'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. They're known as the Big Dipper fireflies. and they have a flash pattern where they stay lit and they fly in a J shape, and then they go out, and then they'll fly in a J shape, go out, fly in a J shape, and they'll repeat that again until a female who's interested flashes the similar pattern from in the bushes, then they fly down and they reproduce. So this is just showing you what that pattern is as opposed to simply a large flash or maybe a smaller flash like you see down here, and then the rate at which it's happening. Really good question. Am I still on there? Perfect. This is Photinus carolinus. This is the species of synchronous firefly that we're going to be looking for tonight. And it looks a lot like other members of its genus, which we'll show you in a little bit. But again, the best way to differentiate between firefly species is with those flash patterns. But Photinus carolinus is not the only synchronous firefly out there. There's another species of firefly from an entirely different genus over in Asia that is also synchronous. So synchrony has evolved in multiple different species of firefly that are not geographically connected. And this festival that we're at tonight, again, is not the only place, even in this area, where you'll see Photinus carolinus. There's a large population in the Great Smoky Mountains, and all along the way there are smaller pockets of these Photinus carolinus fireflies. But we're going to be able to see them tonight in mass. I want to talk about synchrony in fireflies, because the idea of different flash patterns and standing out to find a mate kind of seems pretty contrary to the idea of synchrony and all flashing at once. And scientists have a theory behind why synchrony has evolved in fireflies. Their theory has to do with the populations of fireflies that are synchronous. So the area that we're in right now is really, really optimal and ideal environment and habitat for these fireflies. It's extremely humid, as you can all feel. It's very warm, as you can all feel. And the past few days it's been even warmer. And it's going to be very, very dark with not a lot of light pollution. There's also not a lot of people who are here. Other than this festival, this campsite does not get nearly this many people on the regular. And if you compare that to Pittsburgh itself, far, far fewer people. And what that means is that these populations of fireflies are able to skyrocket. And there's tons and tons of fireflies in a small area. And scientists believe that even though there is the ability to differentiate between species, with all of those fireflies in one area, it can still be hard to find an ideal mate among all of the light and all of the patterns that are going on. So their theory is that synchrony evolved so that the fireflies that are flashing the most accurate stand out from among the ones who are not flashing as accurately. If everyone is trying to flash 6 times in a row, and one of them only flashes 5 times, or it starts a little bit too early, that's going to show the female fireflies that it's not an optimal mate. But if you're flashing all 6 flashes right on cue, really, really bright, you're going to show up the other synchronous fireflies around you, and you're going to be considered an optimal mate. That's the theory behind synchrony for these fireflies. Yeah?
I'm just wondering, so like if there are, say, 20 fireflies flying over a female on the ground, and she really loves the pattern of number 5, but she flashes back, I don't understand how they know which one of them she's flashing back to.
They don't care. Yeah, the males, as soon as they see a female flash back, they don't know if it was for them or for their friend over here. They're going to swoop on down and try to mate with her.
Right.
Her flashing is indicating interest, but they don't know if it's for them or someone else. So they're going to try to take advantage of it. Because if it wasn't interest for them, and they don't get another chance to mate, then they haven't been successful and they haven't been able to pass on their genetic material. So the female might be very strategic and wait until there's only one of those fireflies that she thinks is optimal, or if there's a bunch of fireflies maybe she didn't notice, she might get swarmed and there are going to be a lot of fireflies attempting to mate with her. We will see a lot of overlap in terms of species, but there are some other things other than flash patterns that help to differentiate between species. The time of night that some of these flashing fireflies are out is a great way to stagger different groups of fireflies. So some of them, like the Big Dipper firefly that you mentioned before, they're going to be out much earlier in the evening. They're crepuscular, which means that they're going to be out at dusk, as opposed to a lot of our nocturnal fireflies that are going to be out a lot later at night. Different elevations or heights are going to be where some firefly species are as well. We're going to see some that are very, very close to the ground or in bushes about that height over there, and some of them are going to be all the way in the treetops, and they're not going to necessarily mingle all that much. So there's a few different factors that are going to help those females and males to make sure that they're finding members of the proper species. Really good question. Going back to synchrony, it's not necessarily an on-off switch. So when I first came here with Thomas, again, we were just looking for these synchronous fireflies. We didn't know much about them. We only mentioned that they existed as part of our program very briefly. So I thought I was going to get here and I was going to look at the forest and it was going to be all of the fireflies flash and then all of them stop. It's much more like a fireworks show. If you've ever seen a fireworks show, you'll notice that there's a few fireworks at the beginning to get everything kicked off, and then all of the fireworks happen, and then a few more trail off at the end. That's what synchrony is like for these fireflies. There's a few brave males that have to be the ones to start off the flashing, otherwise no one's going to be able to get in sync with anyone. So you have a few male fireflies that start flashing, 6 flashes rapidly over the course of a few seconds, and then the other males see that and they want to make sure that they're syncing up with everyone else, otherwise they're not going to find a mate. So everyone else starts going off, and then there's a few stragglers towards the end. But again, you're going to see the bulk of it in the middle. So you will notice a few at the beginning, a few at the end, but most of the flashing is going to be in the middle, and then you're going to see a period where there's very little flashing or no flashing at all. Earlier in the evening or earlier at night, it can be difficult for these populations of synchronous fireflies to see each other. So you're going to see separate areas of synchronous fireflies, and it might not look like everyone is synced up at first. Maybe you'll have 5 separate groups where this group is syncing up, and this group is syncing up, and so on and so forth. But as it gets darker, the edges of those groups are going to be able to see each other and start intermingling a little bit more and sync up with each other. And maybe now you have 3 separate groups of fireflies 30 minutes later. And by the time you hit peak darkness and peak firefly time for this species, all of them are going to be able to see each other. All of them are going to have a much easier time syncing up. So when we first get out there tonight, it might look like separate groups. I don't want you to be discouraged by that. Give it some time, pay attention, and you'll be able to notice as they start to notice each other, and larger groups are going to start to sync up with each other. I want to discuss the life cycle and diet of a firefly. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, a life cycle is all of the stages and transformations that a creature undergoes from the time that it's born until the time that it dies. And in the case of fireflies and insects, it starts off with eggs. These eggs are really, really tiny, and the female adult firefly will lay them in a really safe place, typically somewhere dark and humid and warm, just like fireflies need for ideal conditions. So you'll often find them in the leaf litter, or underneath a little bit of soil, or underneath a rotting log. Those are really optimal places to find these firefly eggs. And if you have a bunch of leaves at the base of a tree in your yard, raking away those leaves can sometimes be detrimental to firefly populations because their eggs or other stages of their life cycle could be living there. So I encourage you, as long as it's not going against any laws or ordinances, leave those leaves down. It's really good for not just fireflies, but a lot of different insects and integral animals to our ecosystem. The bottom picture here is these eggs glowing. And firefly eggs do glow. You're not going to lift up a rock and see the Ark of the Covenant shining at you, but if you take a look under magnification, you will see that they do have a faint glow to them. And this happens regardless of whether or not the adults glow as adults. Whether or not the adults glow. So you have flashing fireflies that glow as eggs, and you have those diurnal fireflies that rely on pheromones that still will glow as eggs. And this is some evidence that scientists believe that the ability to flash has evolved and been lost and re-evolved multiple times over the course of evolutionary history of fireflies in general. In about 3 weeks, these firefly eggs will hatch into the next stage of their life cycle, which is the larva. The larva of a firefly is commonly called a glowworm. And there's a few other animals that glowworm can refer to. So I want to introduce you to what those other glowworms are. That way we can focus on this specific glowworm, the firefly larva. So sometimes a railroad worm female will be called a glowworm. This is a species of beetle, and it says up here that these females are larviform. That means that the adult females look like a larva. So this is an adult, even though it might look like the larva of a firefly. And the glowing pattern looks a lot like the edges and ties along a railroad track, hence the name railroad worm. The males, on the other hand, they don't really glow, and they have that adult insect appearance. Another group is fungus gnats, everyone's favorite. They often live in caves, and they have this blue glow, and because they're very worm-like in appearance, they're also called glowworms. Railroad worms and fungus gnats are not fireflies, completely separate groups, but they do have that common name of glowworm, so I kind of want to differentiate from them early. If we go back real quick to this larva form. This is the stage of a firefly's life that it's going to spend in for the majority of its life cycle. It can be a larva for up to 2 years, whereas as an adult, it's only going to spend 3 or 4 weeks of its time. To put that in human scale, imagine that you live to be 75 years old, but 72 of those years were spent as a toddler. Just let that set in for a moment. It's completely backwards from the life cycle of a human. Because they spend so much time as larvae, they've got a few really important jobs. Number 1, don't get eaten. Job number 2, eat a lot of food. And they need to eat a lot of food for a couple of reasons. 1, they need all of that energy and all of that fat stored up to make the transition from a larva into the other stages of their life cycle. And the second reason is that as adults, most firefly species do not eat. Some of them don't even have working mouth parts, which might seem very contrary to the idea of a lot of other animals. But if you spend time searching for food and eating food as an adult firefly, you're spending a lot of valuable time that you could be using to search for a mate. And again, if you only live for 3 to 4 weeks and your main purpose in life is to pass on genetic material, going for a quick snack is really, really dangerous and means that you're probably not going to be able to find a mate or pass on your genetic material. So they make sure to do all of their eating in their larval stage. And because of that, they are voracious, ferocious eaters. This is a glowworm or a firefly larva on the back of a snail. And what it's doing here is it's injecting a paralytic toxin to make sure that that snail can't go anywhere. Very sad snail. It's then going to use digestive juices and enzymes and toxins to liquefy the inside of that snail and slurp it up through those mouth parts like a nice mollusk milkshake. Delicious, right? And it's going to do this to snails and slugs and worms and other insects and arthropods over and over again over the course of those 2 years, getting larger and getting all of those fat stores that it needs to transition into the next stage of its life cycle. Because it's going to be 2 years, they have to be able to survive the winter. And they're going to enter the insect version of hibernation called diapause, where they slow down their bodily functions, they don't need to eat or move around, and they're going to be in a safe place in the leaf litter or under a log until the cold is over and they emerge again in the spring to hunt more. But once those 2 years are up, they're going to make the transition into the next stage of their life cycle, which is the pupa. A pupa is an immobile, transitionary stage of an insect's life cycle. It's very similar in nature to the chrysalis of a butterfly or the cocoon of a moth. Inside of that, the glowworm is gaining all of the necessary bodily functions it needs and bodily aspects it needs to become an adult firefly. So the reproductive system of a firefly is happening and changing inside of this pupa, and they're losing a lot of the things that they needed to hunt for food. All of that transition occurs, and 1 to 3 weeks later they emerge as an adult firefly. So the life cycle of this firefly takes place over the course of years, but what we're seeing over here is happening over the course of a mere 3 to 4 weeks. And that's another reason, again, why it's so urgent what's happening with these fireflies. And it feels so contrary to the peaceful, easy feeling that we have when we're looking at these beautiful light shows at night.
They glow in the pupa?
The pupas do have a faint glow as well, yeah. And again, with the glowworms that I showed before and with the pupa, the glow is independent of whether or not they glow as adults or not. And there's a reason for that we'll discuss in just a little bit. I do want to introduce you first to some common types of local fireflies. Again, we have 15 or more species of firefly in Pennsylvania, but they can be grouped into 3 genera, or 3 genuses, one step removed from species. So for those of you who haven't had that science lesson yet, a species is a group of insects or a group of creatures that are able to reproduce with each other, and species that are similar to each other are grouped one level higher into a genus. These 3 genera are the ones that we have in Pennsylvania. Starting off with Photinus. This includes the Big Dipper fireflies that have that J-shaped flash pattern. They have a yellow glow to them, or a yellow flash, and they're generally a little bit shorter than a ½ inch long. These are among the most common fireflies that we see in Pennsylvania because of their population size, but also because they are some of the earliest fireflies in the evening. So if you don't want to be up until 11 at night looking for fireflies, these are the ones you're going to see when the sun is setting in your backyard. Next up, we have Photurus. And it's not quite this drastic of a size difference, but I do want to illustrate here, Photurus are larger fireflies. They're the largest fireflies that we have in our area. They have a deeper green glow, which might seem pretty distinct from yellow until you start looking for them at night, and it can be very difficult to differentiate between them, but they do have a different color flash that they are going to be using for their flash patterns. They can be a little bit longer than a half an inch. And lastly, we have Pyractomina. They have an orange glow, again, just as tricky to try to distinguish, but it is useful to try to figure out which group of fireflies you're looking at. And they tend to be in swampy or marshier areas, sometimes towards the tops of trees. I don't tend to see Pyractomina as often as I see Photinus and Photurus, and I know in my own backyard in the parks that I work in, I tend to see the Photinus group of fireflies first, followed by the Photurus as it starts to get darker out. Here's some more pictures of these fireflies kind of scaled and in size next to each other, so you can see some identifying features. The Photurus fireflies have this kind of tan stripe on each of their elytra, and if you look at them in a jar under magnification, that's a really great way to differentiate that group. And the Pyractomina fireflies, if you take a look at this part of the thorax called the pronotum, it has a ridge on it. So otherwise it looks very similar to the Photinus firefly, but that ridge is a really great way to differentiate that species of firefly or that genus of firefly from some of the others that we have around here. Another question I often get is how to differentiate between the sexes of firefly. My answer is that the easiest way is to take a look at that light show. If they're flying around, they're male fireflies. If they're flashing from the bushes or from the grass, they're going to be female fireflies. But if you have one, you can also take a look at the lantern and the abdomen. This isn't true for all fireflies, but for many species, you can differentiate between the sexes based on what those lanterns look like. So with this Pyractomina firefly down here, for instance, the male firefly has a complete lantern, and the female firefly's lantern is not complete. Again, I really recommend just taking a look at what fireflies are flashing and starting to learn that language that they're using. That's a much better way to differentiate between male and female fireflies. This firefly over here, has anyone seen a firefly like this flashing before? Good, because this is a liar. This firefly is not a firefly at all. It's another species of beetle, along with many other species of beetle, that is trying to mimic a firefly. It wants to look like a firefly. Does anyone have any guesses why? Yeah. Eat them. That's a very common guess. It does not want to eat them though. And that's what I thought at first, because normally mimicry is related to that. What do you think?
So predators, like their own natural predators won't get them because they think they're fireflies?
Absolutely, yes. It's for protection. There are a lot of animals that want to eat a beetle. There are not as many animals that want to eat a firefly. And that's because fireflies, they have defenses. And a firefly's defense is very similar in warning to that of a poison dart frog, or a skunk, or a monarch butterfly. They use bright colors called aposematic coloration to warn potential predators that they're dangerous and you don't want to mess with them. And very often the danger that these animals possess is not fatal, because if it's a fatal danger, then the animals who tried to eat them don't learn from their mistakes, they just die. But if it's something that just maybe upsets their stomach, like in the case of monarch butterflies, they taste really nasty to birds. Then whenever they see those bright colors again, they're going to remember the previous interaction they had with that animal, and they're going to know to avoid that in the future. And that information can be passed on to other members of their family and other members of their species, and that knowledge helps to protect these creatures in the future. So with poison dart frogs, they're relying on this bright color. With fireflies, they're relying much more on their light as their means of defense. And that light is the bright way of showing off that you don't want to mess with them because they have toxins. This little droplet here is a firefly doing something called reflexive bleeding, where if it gets captured by a potential predator, it can make its blood come out through tiny holes in its body. And in that blood is a chemical called a lucibuphagin. Can we all say lucibuphagin? Lucibuphagin. I do this program for elementary age people all the time, and when they try to say it, it does not go anywhere near as well as that did, and it makes me laugh a lot, and I'm happy when everyone gets it right. Lucibuphagins are a steroid compound that are toxic to a lot of animals that want to eat this firefly. It has a really nasty, bitter taste, makes them want to spit it out, and again, by spitting out that firefly, they will remember those glowing lights next time as a thing that you want to avoid. And by using reflexive bleeding, they don't have to wait until their body is crushed to send off that message. They can excrete that blood from their body early, make sure that the message is received, and then there's a chance that they'll be able to escape. In the event that they're not able to escape, some species not only can excrete this blood through reflexive bleeding, but they also have a sticky, glue-like gummy substance that comes along with it. It's very white in color, and it gums up the mouth of the predator and makes it very difficult for the predators to eat them. This defense right here is why other animals, like that beetle I showed before, might try to mimic a firefly. Because even though that beetle does not have any sort of protection, if it looks like an animal that does have a way to protect itself, then if a species of bird or spider or frog has eaten a firefly before, if it sees something that's similar, it's still not going to want to mess with it just on the off chance that it's dangerous. So it's beneficial for all of those insects that are mimicking the firefly to look like the firefly. Yeah?
Do scientists have an explanation for how the beetle would know that fireflies have this defense mechanism? Like, unless beetles also ate the fireflies and found that out, how does the beetle know that this is a good idea?
Yeah, so a lot of times when it comes to mimicry and the evolution of mimicry in nature, it's not necessarily an active decision that that creature's making. Oftentimes it's the ones that are born with a mutation or that just look with a color more similar to a dangerous animal. Those are the ones that are going to survive and be able to pass on their genes to the next generation. So if you have a couple of different beetles where some of them don't look like fireflies, maybe those are the ones that predatory animals are going to go after. They're going to be eaten. And the remaining ones that did look like fireflies and did have a chance to survive, they pass on those genes. The next generation has a higher chance of being able to mimic that firefly better. So it's not an act or an active decision that that beetle is making to look like a firefly, but over the course of evolutionary history, it has evolved adaptations and colors and morphology that makes it look much more like an animal that is going to be able to protect it by virtue of what that animal has. Really good question. Going back to the defense mechanism of these fireflies with the lucibuphagins, this is where the lies parts of sex lies and fireflies comes into play. There is a lot of deceit that goes on in that beautiful light display, and it is centered around lucibuphagins. Because not all fireflies have this chemical in their bodies, but they all need it if they don't want to be eaten. This is a play that's going on, a scenario that's going to be happening that you're going to see tonight. I want to introduce you to all the players that are happening here. This group here, the Photinus, these are the Big Dipper fireflies. And this group here, the Photurus, are the Pennsylvania fireflies. The Pennsylvania fireflies do not have lucibuphagins. They lack the chemical that they need in order to make sure that they're protected. And not only do they need that chemical to protect themselves, but if they get that chemical in their system, they can pass it on to the next generation. And it will persist in the bodies of the eggs, through their larva stage, through their pupa stage, until they reach adulthood when they run out and need to get more. So it is dire for them that they get these lucibuphagins in their body to protect themselves and their offspring, which again is the most important thing for these fireflies. The Big Dipper fireflies don't care. They are completely unrelated. They want to go about their lives, and they have these lucibuphagins in their body already. So they are gotten off scot-free. They don't have to worry about passing it on to the next generation because they're able to process those chemicals naturally. In order for these Pennsylvania fireflies to get lucibuphagins in their body, they must consume the Big Dipper firefly. And again, with different flash patterns, you might think it's difficult to locate these other members of different species and hunt them at night. Here's where the deceit comes into play. When there is a male Big Dipper firefly flying around at night, he is looking for a female Big Dipper firefly to mate with. A female Pennsylvania firefly knows this, and instead of flashing her pattern to attract a male Pennsylvania firefly, she will mimic the flash pattern of the female Big Dipper firefly. And she will lie. And so the male Big Dipper firefly will see that mimicked pattern and think, great, I got myself a nice dinner date. And he flies on down and lands only to be the dinner of that dinner date. And she will consume him and get those lucibuphagins into her body. Again, look at the size difference here. The male Big Dipper firefly can't really put up much of a fight against the female Pennsylvania firefly. Most fireflies as adults don't eat. I mentioned that before. This is one of the exceptions where they do have working mouth parts. They do need to eat, but it's not for the calories and not for the fat stores. It's for those lucibuphagins that they need to protect them and their offspring.
Is that a one and done deal, or do they need to keep consuming them?
You know, I don't know how many fireflies it takes to get enough lucibuphagins. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, I can try to find that out later. Yeah.
Does the Pennsylvania firefly also mimic like chemical signals to like further deceive the other fireflies?
Ooh, I don't know. They are not relying on pheromones quite as much as the diurnal fireflies, but I'm not sure what pheromone signals are coming into play here. I don't know the answer. That's a really good question. I will say though, there is more deceit that happens here. This is not the end of our story. If the female Pennsylvania firefly, while mimicking the flash pattern of the female Big Dipper firefly, messes up, the male Big Dipper firefly is gonna know, don't go there, this is a bad idea, and can warn other male Big Dipper fireflies to avoid her. If the male Pennsylvania firefly sees, hey, I'm not finding a lot of females who are interested in me because they're all trying to get the lucibuphagins from the Big Dipper fireflies, the male Pennsylvania firefly will mimic the flash pattern of the male Big Dipper firefly. And then the female Pennsylvania firefly, who is already mimicking the flash pattern of the female Big Dipper firefly, will lure in the male Pennsylvania firefly thinking that she's going to get a nice lucibuphagin meal, when in reality, she just found a mate instead. So there's a lot of trickery and deceit. All of that is that beautiful light show that we're seeing. Yeah. A lot more that's going on beneath the surface than I knew, than any of you knew, than anyone would suspect when you take a look at a beautiful light show like that. Yes?
Do the male Pennsylvania fireflies also need to eat other ones to get the lucibuphagins, or do just the females eat?
I don't know, honestly. I think it's only the females that are going to be eating the Big Dipper fireflies. I'm not sure exactly how the males are able to get those chemicals, though. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that some more.
They probably just mate with the females and that's it.
It might be. I'm not sure the answer, though. Yeah.
Well, if there are 50 of them, 50 males and one female, and the female is the one that lays the eggs,
Yeah.
and transmits some of the, however you pronounce it.
The lucibuphagins, yeah.
Um, you know, maybe the males don't need to be toxic.
It's very possible because, again, when you're an adult firefly, that's the end of your life. So if the males are lacking the lucibuphagins, oh well, it's 3 or 4 weeks. But because these females get the lucibuphagins, that persists in their offspring. So the glowworms that live for 2 years, for the majority of the life cycle of those fireflies, they have the lucibuphagins in their body, regardless of if they're male or female, because of what the female adult firefly did before.
Because of trickery.
Because of trickery, because of lies and deceit and mating that's all going on with that beautiful display. I want to discuss very briefly why we should watch fireflies and a little bit about the Firefly Atlas. Again, this is the ideal habitat for fireflies. Have any of you noticed, if you live in Pennsylvania, that firefly populations are in decline? Yeah, I know when I was in my backyard as a kid, I noticed fireflies everywhere, and now I still see them. I still see a lot of fireflies, but their populations are not what they were before. And this is a trend that you can see across insect species, unfortunately. Lots of insect populations are in decline. And insects are really integral to our food web. They are great pollinators. They are necessary as prey items for a lot of other animals. In the case of fireflies, some adult fireflies will pollinate and are really necessary there. And that larval stage, the glowworm, they're really, really critical predators in the food web. So as prey, as predators, as pollinators, fireflies are really, really important insects to have. So I want to discuss some ways that we can help fireflies to make sure that they persist for a lot longer. This area here, I heard someone just saying about mowing. This is bad habitat for fireflies. Because again, there's no protection for those females. If there's 50 males to every female, every single female is extremely valuable. And in this area here, where there's not tall grass, stepping on one female can eliminate a lot of potential future fireflies in the way that one male getting injured will not do so. So it's really, really important that we have a good habitat for female fireflies and for fireflies in general. If you live in a homeowners association or you're particular about your lawn care, we understand that not everyone has the ability to let a meadow grow up in their front yard. But if you are gonna mow your yard, you can always leave a small portion of it, maybe in the backyard, that's not gonna be mowed fully. Or if you just make sure your mower setting is on the highest level, that's still gonna leave a little bit more habitat for these fireflies. They're gonna be resting in that grass during the day. That's where they're gonna be sleeping, so we wanna make sure that they're not gonna be being damaged when they're not awake and actively flying around. A couple other things that you can do in order to help fireflies. Porch lights, making sure that they're not this big light like this is a really important thing, because if you have a large porch light outside your home, that's gonna make it very difficult for these fireflies to see each other with their lanterns and communicate. So if you do have a porch light, make sure that it's a little bit dimmer, or you can either turn it off at light or use motion sensors as a way to make sure that you're not impacting those fireflies too much. Pesticide use is also detrimental to firefly populations. So if you're gonna use pesticides, make sure you're doing it as prescribed and not overdoing it willy-nilly. Make sure you're using it in targeted areas, and if at all possible, try to avoid them or make sure that those pesticides are not general pesticides and they're very specific ones. Pesticides, these fireflies don't have a great way to filter out those chemicals from their body, because again, they're breathing in passively. And those chemicals are all entering through those holes in their body. So anything we can do to limit the pesticides that are harming these fireflies is really important. If you'd like to get more involved and learn more about how you can benefit fireflies, there are citizen science opportunities. You don't have to be a super knowledgeable firefly person to help save these fireflies. You can be very interested in just a curious mind and do a lot to help fireflies. There's resources like the Firefly Atlas. Sorry, I'm pointing to nothing over here. There's resources like the Firefly Atlas that you can go to online, where they'll give you information on how to properly data collect when you're looking at fireflies in your local park or in your backyard. And all of that data is really critical towards scientists learning more about fireflies populations and those species in general. So if you're looking for more information about that, it's through the Xerces Society. They've taken over the Firefly Atlas. You can find that information online. I want to reiterate how important fireflies are, because there's a lot of other insects out there that don't get the love that these fireflies get. There's lots of insects like wasps and flies that are demonized and villainized because they might not be the most appealing to look at, or because they might sting or bite people. And they're really important to the ecosystem still. So if we can do everything we can to save fireflies, that's one step towards making sure that we can save other insects and really help out the environment. If we can't save fireflies, that doesn't bode well for our other insect populations. So there's a lot that you can do. Get involved with Firefly Atlas, and the most important thing is that you're here tonight and learning about fireflies, and everything you learn here, if you spread that information to your friends and family, you can do a lot to make sure that we can save these marvelous creatures and make sure that that nostalgia that you had as a child continues to the next generation. Any questions? No? Some questions over here, yeah.
I saw, I'm in Missouri. We have the one flash time, which might be the J-shaped flash.
Yeah.
I saw one trapped in a spider web, and it was flashing at about twice its frequency.
Yeah, so I mentioned before, flashing is not only used for mating, it can also be used to warn about predators. So if the firefly that's flying by can't see that spider web, it can see the other firefly that's flashing that warning signal and letting them know that there's danger there. Spiders are one of the main predators of fireflies, so they have that practice down, that they have that warning signal to let other fireflies know about the impending danger. Yes?
How can fireflies see behind them if they're looking in the opposite direction?
Oh, that's a great question. So for those of you who couldn't hear, how can fireflies see behind them if they're looking in the opposite direction? Those compound eyes that I showed the really zoomed in picture of before, they have these tiny little cells called ommatidia. And they take a tiny little picture of the world around them, and because the insect eye is so big, they can see in almost 360 degrees. So if I was a firefly, I'd be able to see almost behind me. So they can figure out where each other is when they're looking for potential mates or when they're trying to avoid potential threats because of the structure of their eye. Really great question. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you know about how big the population is here of fireflies?
I'm not sure specifically. I think kind of Peggy would be able to give some more information about that.
Abundant and biodiverse.
There we go.
That's what it said in the report.
And the report said they were abundant and biodiverse. We have over 20 different species in Pennsylvania, and we have up to 18, 19 of those species here at any given time throughout the season. And they found the synchronous fireflies all throughout the Allegheny National Forest in every recreational area that they took a survey. So the synchronous firefly were identified as abundant, and the whole area is considered biodiverse with all the species. They were very impressed. They do not see that in every place that they survey.
Are there any blue ghosts?
We do not have the blue ghosts. The blue ghosts are specific to the Carolinas and Great Smoky Mountains. We do have what we're going to look at tonight, the Chinese lantern, or the Pennsylvania. He kept referring to them as a Pennsylvania firefly. They're the Photurus genus, and they have a long, slow glow. At certain times of the night, you'll see them throughout this area around the creek. We're gonna go look at them just a little while, and I'll explain more about what they're doing. Okay.
Great questions. Are there any last questions? Yeah.
So they mate for like up to 4. They're the life. They mate for up to 4 weeks. What if a male finds a mate like that first week? Do they just keep mating those next 3 weeks? Or
As I understand, it takes a lot of energy out of the male to mate, so he might not have enough energy after that to continue. If he does, I'm sure he's going to try to look for another mate. They're not monogamous in the sense that he finds one mate and they settle down and they raise the eggs together.
Buy a house and.
Yeah, not the species that I've seen at least, but it does take a lot of energy in order to mate for these fireflies. And again, because they're not replenishing their energy stores as adults, sometimes it's just going to be a one and done for them. Yeah, great question. If you have any more questions this evening, please ask any of your guides that are wearing the staff vest there. I'll be around as well if you have any more questions, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Ken now.
Let me say something while you're standing.
Sure.
So we have people from all over the country here tonight, as we did the other nights, and it's really important. You wouldn't know that the Allegheny Park System is physically in the city of Pittsburgh. And what an asset it is, and how visionary they are as a leadership team to allow Matt and Thomas to come up here in uniform and represent not just Allegheny State Park System, but the state of Pennsylvania. So please, let's give a big round of applause for Matt.